Welcome to today's podcast, where we'll be diving into the latest developments surrounding Iran, the US, and Israel, and how these key regional actors are shaping the evolving dynamics. We'll explore the likely scenarios on the horizon, examining the impact of recent actions and decisions, and unpack the complexities are at play. Our goal, as always, is to provide clarity to you, our valued and loyal viewers. Our guest today is Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine intelligence specialist and a former UN weapons inspector. But before we start, I'd like to ask that if you do find the content we put out interesting, then please do like, share, and definitely subscribe by pressing the notification bell so you're always alerted whenever we drop new content. Scott Ritter, welcome to Unfiltered with S.A.M.
Oh, thank you very much for having me back.
Always a pleasure to host you. I wanted to start by touching on Russia. They've held back from events unfolding in Gaza and Syria, but would they hold back and make way for the US and Israel to militarily impose their will on Iran? Yes, they're busy with the Ukraine front, but they did sign back in January that comprehensive 20-year strategic partnership deal with Iran, but it falls short of a mutual defense pact. So in the event of a standoff between the US and Iran, what will Russia do?
Well, I think we need to understand a couple of things. One, the strategic framework that Russia and Iran signed is not a defense treaty, as you pointed out. Russia is under no obligation to come to the defense of Iran. Russia's under no obligation to go to war on behalf of Iran, nor do I believe does Iran want Russia to have such an obligation, or is Iran expecting Russia to do this? This is unrealistic in the extreme. Russia has a strategical relationship with Iran. I mean, this agreement shows that. We see Russia and Iran collaborating on a number of fronts. And I think one of the things that unites their collaboration is their opposition to the policies of the United States, which are very unilateral in nature, a deviation from international law in many cases. But the waters are muddied here, because when we speak of Iran's nuclear program, remember that Russia was a member of continues to be a member of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Russia was one of the parties that helped negotiate this. And a part of the JCPOA that people tend to dismiss today or not consider is actually one of the foundational elements of the JCPOA. The widespread recognition that Iran's nuclear program, left unconstrained, represented a threat to international peace and security. This is not a debate. I'm not here to debate this with anybody because it's undebatable. The Security Council of the United Nations made such a determination. The IAEA Board of Governors made such a determination, and Russia was a part of both determinations. Undisputed fact. And the thing that attaches to this recognition of an unconstrained Iranian program representing this existential threat to international peace and security is the concept of what we'll call it, Iran as a threshold nuclear power, meaning that, this isn't covered by the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty has either nuclear weapon states, 5 acknowledged, or you have non-nuclear weapon states, and there are obligations that are attached to both. Unfortunately, the nuclear weapon states aren't living up to their obligations to get rid of nuclear weapons. And unfortunately, the concept of non-proliferation, nuclear non-proliferation, has been imperfectly applied to the non-nuclear weapon states. We have Israel that has a nuclear weapons program, or at least everybody acknowledges they have a nuclear weapons program. They haven't openly declared it. We have North Korea that backed out of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, developed their own nuclear weapons program. We have India and Pakistan that have nuclear weapons. So, we understand that the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is an imperfect vehicle, imperfectly applied. We get that, but it still exists, and it is part of the body of international law that holds the world together. But within this treaty, there is no concept of a threshold state. And so there are people out there who say the United States is holding Iran to an artificial standard, that the United States is talking about the potential of Iran to have a nuclear weapon, but that's not covered by the nuclear by the NPT. And they're correct and they're wrong. It's not in the body of the NPT, but the NPT served as a foundational element of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action is built singularly around the notion of a 1-year breakout timeframe, meaning that the restrictions imposed on Iran's nuclear program were designed to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon if it decided that it was going to cease complying with the JCPOA. That 1-year breakout window was essential. That was the sole thing that had the United States moving forward in this direction, reversing its policy of not one spinning centrifuge to be allowed in Iran to Iran is allowed to have a enrichment program as long as that program is constrained, so that there is a 1-year breakout window. Now, that's why the agreement was entered into. But the problem with the agreement is that it allowed these restrictions to expire, the sunset clauses. And this is why Donald Trump withdrew from the agreement, because what Donald Trump believed, and it was believed by the United States Senate, there's a reason why the JCPOA is not a treaty. And that's because the United States Senate, which is constitutionally obligated to provide, advise, and consent and ratify these treaties such as this, said we're not going to do it because it's a fundamentally flawed agreement. And the foundation of this flaw is built within the understanding of the United States. The United States intelligence community in 2007 published an estimate that said that they don't believe Iran has a nuclear weapons program at that time. But contained in that document was this assertion that Iran did have a nuclear weapons program up until 2003, when Iran unilaterally put it to the side. Now, people like me, I don't agree with that. I don't think any evidence has been put out there that proves Iran had a nuclear weapons program. But this is the assessment of the United States intelligence community, and that assessment drives American policy. And in 2007, when they said Iran doesn't have a nuclear weapons program, they once again reasserted that Iran did have a nuclear weapons program, and that's the poison pill. Because the JCPOA did not allow a full investigation into this issue. The JCPOA investigated military, I forget what the exact terminology was, but military aspects of Iran's program. They were investigated and the book was shut, but they never made a definitive decision on the 2003 assertion. And so what that means is that if Iran had a nuclear weapons program in 2003, something Iran has denied having and which has never been thoroughly investigated by the international community, and now we have a situation where we constrain Iran's nuclear weapons or nuclear program, enrichment program, but with sunset clauses, which once they expire, give Iran the ability to become a threshold state. The definition of a threshold state is that they can break out and build, have nuclear weapons capabilities within a very short period of time. What do you do about this program that Iran had in 2003 that's never been verified what it was, what extent it was, what it comprised of, who did it? Could that program not just be brought back into play and the threshold status becomes a nuclear weapon status overnight? This is the fundamental flaw of the JCPOA from the perspective of Israel and the United States. This is why Donald Trump withdrew from it, and he's looking for a better deal. And he's been saying that from day one. So that's where we stand today, where Iran, according to Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, has published, who published an assessment. She said the following, that the U.S. intelligence community believes that Iran is not producing a nuclear weapon today. That's an accurate statement. She also said that the U.S. intelligence community believes that the leadership of Iran has not made the political decision to produce a nuclear weapon. That's an accurate statement. Both statements are accurate. The problem is that Iran is a nuclear threshold state. It has compiled a stockpile of 60% enriched uranium, permitted under the NPT, but not permitted under the initial part of the JCPOA. Why? Because 60% enriched uranium is one enrichment step away from becoming weapons grade uranium, and Iran currently has sufficient stockpiles of 60% enriched uranium, which, if cycled through advanced centrifuges, which Iran has already assembled and deployed in the Firdos underground enrichment reactor, could give Iran sufficient quantities of highly enriched uranium within a period of days, if not weeks, to produce 3 to 5 nuclear weapons. Now, this is the assessment of the International Atomic Energy Agency. I share that assessment, but what's more important here is that Iran shares that assessment. We've had a string of Iranian officials over the course of the last year make the assertion that if Iran made the political decision to produce nuclear weapons, they have assembled all of the components necessary, and within a period of weeks, they would have a nuclear weapon. This is what a threshold nuclear power is, and it's something that the international community, including Russia, said represents a threat to international peace and security back prior to the 2015 JCPOA being signed. So Iran's in a predicament here. They're not in non-compliance with the NPT, but they're playing a very dangerous game because they know the international community has rejected the notion of an Iranian state that has threshold nuclear weapons capability, and yet Iran has taken it right up to that edge. They are literally waving the red flag in front of the American bull, and Russia is not going to get in the way of this.
Wow. Oh. My thinking is an ideal scenario would be for Iran to give up its sovereign nuclear rights. I don't disagree with people who say that. I think you might also be of that thought. But one, though, can rightfully question, how can we expect Iran to give up its sovereign nuclear rights, especially when the alternative is to place that trust in a country like the US, because it's the US who's coming in the forefront. It's not like the IAEA or the international community, the US solely, who's actively arming and funding what many have long been saying is, and you also and me, a genocide in Gaza. I mean, how can that happen? The ideal scenario of Iran giving up its sovereign nuclear rights.
Well, first of all, I would never call for Iran to give up its sovereign nuclear rights. Iran is a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and Iran is afforded all of the rights given to other NPT powers under Article 4 of that treaty, inclusive of the ability to possess the complete nuclear fuel cycle, the ability to mine material, process material, enrich material, and produce the fuel. They even, under that law, have the ability to reprocess the fuel. But the problem is when you reprocess spent uranium fuel, you get plutonium, and sufficient quantities of plutonium can be used for a weapon. Iran made a mistake back in 2003 timeframe where they did actually violate the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in submitting false declarations to the international community about its acquisition and doing certain things covertly. There's a reason why Iran did that. That's because the international community was violating Iran's rights under Article 4 by imposing sanctions that restricted Iran's ability to acquire this material legally. So Iran went to the black market. It's very muddied waters. But the problem is once you violate this treaty, different rules apply. And this is why, for instance, Iran, the international community will not allow Iran to reprocess spent nuclear fuels, even though under Article 4 they're allowed to do so, because Iran won't be allowed to acquire plutonium. And this is a reason why people believe that Iran, their program should be limited to producing enriched uranium sufficient to produce the low enriched uranium fuel, 3.5 to 5% enrichment used to produce fuel rods. I believe Iran has every right to have this capability. I believe Iran should be allowed to produce efficient centrifuges that make this production economically viable. And Iran should be allowed to have as many nuclear reactors as they want, so far as these reactors are monitored in accordance with the safeguards agreement that Iran signs with the International Atomic Energy Agency. So I don't believe Iran should give up the totality of its sovereign nuclear rights. I believe Iran is a sovereign state, and as a sovereign state, a signatory to the NPT, Iran has a right to have this, and they should be allowed to have this. What Iran, I believe, needs to give up is the ability to become a nuclear weapons threshold state, that there have to be sufficient restrictions on Iran's nuclear program so that Iran will not be able to achieve threshold status. This means that we have to throttle down their centrifuge numbers. They can't have position numbers, and that their program needs to be scaled to the need, the actual need. And then we can dilute it even further when we see, for instance, like Russia saying that they will build nuclear reactors, that Russia should be encouraged to work out a deal with Iran where Russia will provide the fuel and then take the fuel and reprocess it and eliminate this aspect of Iran's program, further reducing the need for Iran to have excessive nuclear enrichment infrastructure, which bothers the world. Now, when I say the world, let's be clear here. Iran's status as a nuclear threat to the international community is solely derived from Israel. That's it. Let's not pretend anything else. We know that Israel created this problem back in 2002. They fabricated some information. They had some good information. They brought together, you used a proxy, the Mujahideen al-Khalq, who began briefings in Washington, D.C. to get the United States motivated. And the United States and Israel have been the driving force behind this. And if it weren't for that, I don't think we'd have a situation that we face today. I think the safeguards agreements were sufficient to constrain Iran, who I believe wasn't seeking a nuclear weapons at any time, although it hasn't been thoroughly investigated. And I leave the possibility open, but what I've looked at shows that there isn't this, that there has never been a nuclear weapons program. Now, why should Iran do this? Well, because it's a signatory to the JCPOA, or to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, because Iran wants to survive as a modern nation state. I mean, this isn't, we don't live in a fair world. I want people to understand that completely. If we lived in a fair world, then I would be able to arbitrarily point at Israel and say, you must sign the NPT, you must turn over your nuclear weapons program to international inspections and be held accountable as other nations do. That's the right thing to do. But I live in the real world. That's just not going to happen. There's no pathway to that anybody can provide under the current political realities. The United States is a nation thoroughly hijacked by a pro-Israeli lobby. And as long as this hijack continues to be underway, the United States isn't going to permit that. So when people say, well, you can't expect Iran to do it, yes, you can. Yes, you can expect it, because we live in the real world. We don't live in a fantasy world. We don't live in an artificial world. We live in the real world, where, unfortunately, hypocrisy reigns supreme. And Iran knows this. Because if Iran lived in a world where it arbitrarily said, we're not going to deal with hypocrites, then they wouldn't have signed the JCPOA. And then Iran would be destroyed as a modern nation state. I mean, this is unfortunately the give and the take here. To survive in the world today, you do have to comply with rules that are arbitrarily applied by powers who operate in hypocritical fashion. It's just a statement of fact. It doesn't mean I'm
Sure.
happy about it.
Yeah.
And sure, I'd love to go out and protest in the streets, big signs, Israel has no nuclear bomb. How does that solve the issue at hand here? And the answer is it doesn't.
Yeah.
So Iran has to be realistic here. Iran has to do that which is necessary for Iran to survive. I think you live in a region where you know the harsh reality of war. You tell me, all those principled people who stand up and say, no genocide in Gaza, that are in Gaza, many of them are dead today. Where did their principles get them? We can applaud their principles, but they're under the ground now, buried, because their principles in the face of the reality mean nothing. That doesn't mean that we don't protest. That doesn't mean that we don't call out hypocrisy. But what it means is if we want to stop people dying, we have to come up with realistic solutions based upon the reality as it exists, not the fantasy that we want to be.
Yes.
Not
the utopian world. Yes. Not the utopian world that we wish for.
No, gosh, wouldn't it be a wonderful world if we got what we wished for? It would be a great world, but as you said, it's a utopian world. That's a fantasy. It's a fiction. We live in a horrible world.
Yes,
we live in a world where all of the evil attributes of humanity have manifested themselves in governments that control the mechanisms that are dealing out death and destruction. Do I want this to change? Absolutely. But people keep asking me, how do we solve this problem?
Yeah.
And we solve this problem by dealing with reality. Not fiction, not fantasy. I don't need to be lectured by people who say, Scott, you're not defending the people of Gaza sufficiently.
Oh,
well,
you've done plenty of that. I can attest to that.
I know I have, but people are like, instead of, telling Iran that it must surrender aspects of its nuclear sovereignty, which is an insult to Iran. No, I actually care more about the Iranians than you do. Not you, but the people who are saying that Iran must never surrender. Because most of the people saying Iran must never surrender don't live in Iran.
Yeah.
And therefore, when the bombs fall, they get to sit back and play, the hypocrisy of America, the horror of American policy. But the Iranian people are dead.
Right. Yeah.
If you care about the Iranian people, stop playing stupid games and start focusing on that which must happen to prevent the bombs from falling. And I'm not talking about the absolute capitulation of Iran. I'm simply saying that Iran must surrender aspects of its nuclear sovereignty if it wants this crisis to end in a fashion that avoids military confrontation with a world superpower.
Yeah. Yes. So with the upcoming talks set to start in just a couple of days, the indirect talks between the US and Iran in the Sultanate of Oman, how can Iran then negotiate meaningfully with a Trump-led administration? You just explained that, but I'm now focusing on the person himself, on President Trump. I know he's sending his envoys there, but they are enforcing his directives. So his history includes abrupt policy, reversals and contradictory statements on everything, from tariffs to Gaza. So, are you optimistic that we might see white smoke coming out of the Sultanate of Oman?
I'll be a little facetious here, but this is why the Iranian foreign minister gets paid the big bucks. All right. This is a big boy job he's got. It's not going to be easy. Ideally, he would like to be facing off against a seasoned diplomat who doesn't just seek implementation of policy directives from the President of the United States, but policy directives that have been worked through an American system that shows at least a modicum of respect for international law and for diplomatic due process. That would be nice. That's not what he's getting. He's sitting down with the personal envoy of one of the most volatile presidents in the history of the United States, a man who If anybody's going to sit here and say, I know what Donald Trump's thinking, I would say you don't know what Donald Trump's thinking. Sometimes I wonder if even Donald Trump knows what he's thinking until the moment that he thinks it. He's that volatile. But what we do have seen is this, that Donald Trump, in his insane art of the deal manner, he goes straight to escalation.
Yeah.
So the first thing that happens when he's trying to cut a deal with Iran is that he starts, with the maximum pressure campaign. Well, that didn't achieve anything other than the Iranians getting their dander up and saying, we're not going to talk to you. And then he doubles down on this by sending a letter to the Ayatollah Khamenei, which, frankly speaking, based upon the text that has been published, if that text is accurate, was insulting to the supreme leader, insulting to the Iranian government, insulting to the Iranian people. And all that did is get the Iranians to further say, we're not going to negotiate. And then he said, I'm going to blow you off the face of the earth. Oh. And he started assembling the military power to do that. And suddenly you have a situation where the Iranians say, we might be open to negotiations, but it would be indirect in nature, that we'll never sit down with America. And Donald Trump says, we might be open to negotiations too, just about the nuclear program, not all of the list of things that we put out there. And now we have Steve Witkoff meeting with the foreign minister in Oman on Saturday. How did that happen? How did we get to that meeting? Because there's this crazy process going forward that's not standard. No one teaches this in the in Georgetown diplomatic schools. Harvard doesn't teach this because it's insane. Nobody thinks like this. It's crazy. But had we started off saying that Steve Witkoff's going to fly to Oman and meet with his Iranian counterparts, they said, no, we've got nothing to talk about. Now they have everything to talk about. Yeah. And they're going to talk about it. And, it even gets more curious. Steve Witkoff says, yeah, I'm going to Oman, but if I need to fly to Iran and meet there, I'm ready.
I'd do it.
So, hey, here we are. Am I going to sit here and say that this is the ideal way to work things out? No, I'm not. Am I nervous? Oh, very nervous. Am I optimistic? Well, I'm more optimistic today than I was last week.
Yeah.
This doesn't mean that this process is going to be easy. It doesn't mean that it's going to succeed. It's going to be extraordinarily difficult. Both sides are going to have to make compromises. Both sides. This isn't going to be a one-way street. But now here's the key question. Does Iran have any other choice than to do this and trust that America will live up to its obligations? Yeah. They have no other choice because, again, I get in trouble when I say this, but I just tell you, I live in a reality-based world. People who think that Donald Trump is bluffing about bombing Iran don't know Donald Trump. If Iran refuses to budge, Iran will be taken off the face of the earth. Now, there's people out there that say, well, Scott, America can't take the Houthi off the face of the earth. Yeah. How are they going to take Iran? I want people to understand that what we're doing in Yemen is not a nation-killing exercise. What we're doing in Yemen is a very limited scope and scale military operation that is failing, by the way. We're not succeeding. Yeah. But it's designed to deter and interdict Nasrallah's ability to fire missiles into Israel and into shipping. That's the whole purpose of it. I can guarantee you that if we said we are in a strategic war with Yemen, a nation-killing war, that this war would be over because Yemen would no longer exist because we would have destroyed the nation of Yemen. I'm not bragging about it. I'm not sitting here saying this is the right thing.
You're saying the reality of it.
Happen at all.
Yeah.
I'm just telling you the reality of it. So for the people out there who say, America can't even take care of Nasrallah, how could they take care of Iran? Because if we go after Iran, we're not going for a limited scope and scale interdiction. We are going for a nation-killing exercise. This means that tens of millions of Iranians will probably die. tens of millions of Iranians. Now, all of you out there saying, well, the world will be outraged. I hope so. I would hope the world would be outraged by this, that the United States would become a pariah. I hope so. We would deserve to become a pariah. Does that save the lives of the 50 million Iranians? That's my question to you. And the answer is no. So as an American, it's in my interest that we don't commit the most horrific war crime in the history of humanity by launching nuclear attack against Iran, which, by the way, is what this attack would be. That we don't become even more of a pariah than we already are. I want my country actually to recover from the state that it currently exists, where the world looks down on us in terms of our quality as a member of the international community. We sort of suck right now. Excuse my language, but we're not the good guys, and I'd like us to be the good guys. And one way we can become the good guys is by not dropping nuclear weapons on Iran, not killing 50 million people. But the Iranian government has a duty and responsibility too. Don't wave the red flag in front of the American bull.
Yeah. Because
if you do, I can guarantee the outcome. We're going to charge and we're going to gore you to death.
Clear.
So there has to be a way out of this. This is why I advocate, and people get angry at me because I singularly focus on negotiations. Now, I'm not saying that what I say, people listen and go, oh, Scott Ritter said there should be negotiations, therefore we're going to have negotiations. That's not the game I play. I'm an analyst. And when asked the question, how do we prevent a war? I say the only way to prevent a war is through negotiation. And I've been proven correct. There will be negotiations now. Now, we don't know that the war has been prevented, but this is the only path available. And for all the people out there saying that Iran shouldn't bend the knee, again, if you live in Vietnam, you're not going to die when the bombs drop. So you can sit there and live in whatever fantasy construct you put out there. The reality is, it's the Iranians who pay the price. So let the Iranian government do what the Iranian government needs to do to survive. And America, we need to do the right thing too. We need to, be realistic of what we can expect from Iran. We'll see. As I said, the people sitting down at this meeting, this is why they get paid the big bucks. Yeah. All right. This isn't a job for amateurs. This isn't a job for dilettantes. This isn't a job for, your summer warriors. This is the job for people who are going to have to dig deep
and not for the faint-hearted either.
Pardon?
Not for the faint-hearted either.
It's not for the faint-hearted. This is going to be staring people in the eyes that don't necessarily get along, but have no choice but to get along. Have no choice. That's just the reality that we live in today. And your question, am I optimistic? As I said, I'm more optimistic today than I was last week. Yes. I would like to be even more optimistic a week from now once we find out what happened. I would love for Mr. Witkoff to fly to Tehran and have a meeting with the supreme leader. And, and I'll tell you why. I don't know this guy. Fact is, I don't think anybody knew of this guy before Trump got elected and suddenly anointed him as his special envoy for the Middle East. But what I do know is this: Donald Trump was stuck in a quagmire of his own making about Russia and about Ukraine. I'm going to solve this problem in 24 hours. We're going to, we know the secret to Russia's weaknesses. We're going to put pressure on Russia. Russia's going to yield. They became president. The Russians were like, that ain't going to happen. No, that's just not going to happen. And next thing you know, it's just a disaster. And then he put Steve Witkoff on a plane to Moscow. And Witkoff, this unknown, this man who brought about a ceasefire that nobody thought could be brought about in Gaza, sits down with Vladimir Putin, and suddenly we have two nations breaking through a wall and beginning a dialogue that had never been happening for many years between the United States and Russia. If the Iranians are listening, let Steve Witkoff come to your country and let him talk. He is the right-hand man of the President of the United States. And when he speaks, the president listens. And when he speaks, he's speaking for the president. He's been given that kind of authority. He's not an unreasonable man. Ask Vladimir Putin. He's a reality-based man. So if you can speak to him respectfully and speak with him realistically and tell him your perspective, he will work with you. And I think you'll get the deal that will be satisfactory to all parties. So I'm excited. I think this guy is a dynamo. He's not perfect. No, I mean, because I know what's going to happen. Witkoff, on Gaza, yes, good God, you can't find a single American in power who can speak in a way about Gaza that makes anybody happy. It's because we don't have good policy. We have horrible policy, genocidal supporting policy.
Yes.
But you can't compare Gaza with Iran or Gaza with Russia. I think the Iranian analogy is more accurately defined by Russia than it is Gaza. And on Russia, Witkoff, he pulled a miracle out of the hat. I'd like to believe that he has the potential to pull a miracle out of the hat with Iran as well.
Me too.
Yeah.
I wanted
it's a weird world where we have to live on hope.
Yeah, but it's what keeps us going. I mean, at least us here in the Middle East, it's what keeps us going through all these decades and all these conflicts. Let me tell you that. It's hope. Seriously.
Yep. I mean, you guys live it. You guys live it every single day. And that's the other thing that I try to impart to people, especially here in the United States. We on either side, we get high and mighty. I mean, we can get the "Make America Great Again," thing, and yeah, but what about the rest of the world? I mean, when you sit there and talk about the American worker suffering under the oppression of, the deep state, okay, so you acknowledge that there is suffering, and that the average people, the little people, do suffer. Why can't you recognize that the little people around the world suffer as well? Why can't you take the empathy that should arise from an understanding of the situation of an American and apply it to a Lebanese, to a Palestinian? Because we do it with Israel. I mean, we're so empathetic with Israel. We're, oh my God, the Israelis bleed, sneeze, cry. Oh, it's horrible for America. Okay, I'm not denying Israel's humanity. I'm going to get in trouble for saying that, but they're human beings, the average Israeli, and they deserve to have the same quality of life as everybody else. So yes, we have empathy for them, but why can't we have empathy for the Palestinian people who are suffering even worse and have suffered worse for a longer time and are actually the aggrieved party of this conflict? Why can't we have empathy for the Lebanese who are trapped in this thing? I mean, you have so many people in Beirut right now. I have friends in Beirut that aren't part of this struggle, meaning they're not, I don't know their politics, but they're not out there advocating. They just want to live. They want to live. They want to raise a family. They want to have jobs. They want to enjoy life like everybody else wants to do. And they're caught in this war. Why can't we respect that? That's the MAGA thing. And then on the other side, I'll call them the progressive, do-gooders. They want a utopia that doesn't exist. Again, if you could sit down, if I handed you a piece of paper and said, sketch out, because you're a smart person. That's why I'm on this show, because I respect your intelligence. And if I handed you 2 sheets of paper and said, write down what you think the Middle East should look like. And then I said, now write down what you think the Middle East will look like. Will, not should, will. 2 totally different pictures, because the realities.
Yeah.
You know the realities. The problem here is that we have a bunch of do-gooders in America that only promote utopia, that only promote a utopian outcome. And they have no consideration for the reality that you live, you breathe. And so they're actually insulting you and everybody else, because their utopia and the promulgation of this utopia gets bombs drop on your head. And my position is, I want the bombs to stop dropping on their head, and it ain't going to happen with utopia.
Yeah.
It's going to happen with reality. Is the reality just? Well, it's just, and so that if we can recognize it, we might be able to stop the bombs. That's sort of a kind of justice I would like. Stop the killing, stop the death, and then we can work on solving the other problems. But these people say, oh, then you've compromised, you've sold out, you're doing the bidding of Israel, you're doing the bidding of an imperial America. I'd like to believe I'm actually doing the bidding of the mother and the child whose life isn't going to be lost when a bomb drops on their head. That's the bidding I'm doing, nobody else. And who are we to demand their sacrifice? That's what I don't understand, is we believe that because of the righteousness of the causes that we've embraced, that we have a right to demand the sacrifice of the lives of tens of thousands so that we can then demonstrate in the streets and say, Israel has killed tens of thousands, which Israel has done using American weapons, but facilitated by the unrealistic utopian expectations of who oppose that policy because you're not willing to delve into the realm of reality and come up with realistic solutions that people might actually listen to. I don't know if the Iranian government's listening to me. I don't know if the American government's listening to me, but I can guarantee you this. By putting out reality-based analysis, that's more likely to find its way into a folder on the desk of decision makers than me standing in the street with a sign that says, Iran must have nuclear weapons. The second anybody who enters that argument is dismissed by the real leaders in the world, because that's a stupid argument. It's an indefensible argument. People are like, well, Iran must have them so that America will never be able to do what? It's an artificial analogy that's drawn between Iraq giving up its nuclear weapons. Iraq never had nuclear weapons. They didn't give them up. Libya giving up its nuclear. Libya wasn't allowed to have them. They never gave them up. They were taken away. North Korea, what people don't realize is that we did not bomb North Korea because of any nuclear thing. We could have taken them off the map anytime we wanted to. It takes a while to produce nuclear weapons. We didn't take North Korea off the map for the same reason why we didn't pull the trigger back in 1994. 30,000 North Korean artillery pieces deployed across the river from Seoul that if the war starts will bring death and destruction down on millions of South Koreans, and we don't know how to prevent that. That's what stops the war, not North Korea's nuclear weapons. So the people who say that North Korea is safe because of a nuclear weapons program, you don't know what you're talking about. All North Korea is guaranteed that if we do go to war against North Korea, we just use bigger nuclear bombs. That's it. Instead of using the lower yield ones, now if we go to war against North Korea, we are bringing in the big bombs, 200, 300, 500 megatons. And North Korea will see it become a glass field. This is reality. But the people are saying North Korea is safe now because they have nuclear weapons. No. North Korea was safe because they had 30,000 artillery pieces dug into the hills across the river from Seoul. And they still do. But all the North Korean nuclear weapons did is guarantee that when America hits them, if we hit them, it'll be done with the biggest weapons possible. It's the same thing. Iraq's not the same as Iraq. Iraq invaded Kuwait. People tend to forget that, take that out of the calculations. And what Libya did and agreed to in 2003 has nothing to do with the reasons why Gaddafi was overthrown in 2011. There is no connectivity between that timeline. So the people are out there saying Iran must have a nuclear weapon because of Iraq, because of Libya, and the North Korean examples. You don't know what you're talking about. You're historically flawed, factually flawed, morally flawed people who make that argument.
Scott, I wanted to ask you about Netanyahu's recent visit to Washington the other day to meet President Trump. It revealed in real time. They sit down in front of the press corps, when they first sit just to give comments in front of the court before they convene in their meetings. It revealed unexpected policy gaps. I mean, Netanyahu went there seeking to get U.S. support on, Iran's nuclear program and the ongoing conflict in Gaza. However, President Trump announced, the forthcoming diplomatic talks with Iran, signaling, this divergence from Netanyahu's hawkish stance. And then the whole thing with Turkey, how he was telling him, I need you to be logical when it comes to Turkey. It completely threw everyone by surprise. I'm sure Netanyahu also himself. So I was and when I'm talking about Turkey, at least for our viewers, if they're not aware, it's he was advocating for Israel to take a more measured approach when it comes to towards Turkey, because Turkey is pushing its boundaries with its involvement in supporting Jolani's troops in Syria with its neo-Ottoman aspirations. So that's why he was, and this could also potentially lead to a conflict sometime, many analysts believe, between Turkey and Israel. So what were your inherent thoughts when you saw this thing unfold live on TV?
Well, look, I'm a human being, because there's another aspect that unfolded there that you didn't mention, which was Donald Trump doubling down on his Gaza depopulation strategy.
Yes.
And when I heard that,
Yeah.
the blood ran to my head. I'm pulling my hair out. I'm furious, and so my first thoughts were I didn't listen to anything else because I was running around the room kicking dogs and punching walls. I didn't really kick the dogs. I love them to death, and I didn't punch the walls because my wife won't tolerate that kind of behavior. But what I'm trying to say is that that aspect of his presentation dominated. So it's been a while. I had to pull back and calm down and look at the other things. This is what I'm going to say about this. There are people out there who, again, say that Netanyahu's calling all the shots, that we are servants of Israel. I'm just here to tell you right now that America is the servant to nobody but the United States of America. We're not beholden to anybody but the United States of America. Israel is a tool used by a very powerful Jewish American lobby in the United States that uses Israel as a vehicle of empowerment. They play on a number of different emotional buttons: the Holocaust, Israel's tiny nation, Israel is an extension of America. You name it, it's there. They play those drums. But it's about domestic American political power, not about Israel calling the shots. If you think that there's Israeli strings attached to an American puppet, you have no idea what you're talking about. And the proof is what you just saw there. If Israel was the one calling the shots, Netanyahu would have been making proclamations that made American presidents uncomfortable. But it's the American president that's calling the shots, and only the American president that calls the shots. The American president has to deal with domestic political realities so that you can't be totally dismissive of it. This is why Netanyahu's here. And the other thing I have to say is, understand that Netanyahu, I believe, was supposed to be in court. And he's a guy who's running away from a lot of trouble. And he came to America to wrap himself in the American flag as part of his political protection. And I think a lot of this meeting was very, sort of done on the fly, as opposed to what normal state visits of this nature should be, which is diplomats exchanging point papers and making sure that they discuss this thing. So when the two leaders sit down, it's really pro forma. They're just signing off on things that have already been agreed to. Netanyahu came in here not knowing what's going to go on. And I think Donald Trump walked in the meeting not knowing what he was going to say. And then on the spur of the moment, Trump just decided, yeah, screw it. Excuse my language. Turkey owns Syria. I mean, that was fascinating, the conversation he relayed about his phone call with Erdogan. You've taken over Syria. No, we haven't.
He's fascinated.
Yes, we have.
He admires Erdogan.
Pardon?
He speaks of him in admiration, huh?
Well, because Erdogan he's a miniature Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump's just sent Pete Hegseth to Panama Canal saying, we own you. We've kicked the Chinese out. We own this thing. It's just a de facto statement about ownership of sovereign territory. We've told the people of Greenland, we own you. Well, you belong to us. Well, no, we don't. Yeah, you do. And we're telling people of Canada, we own you too. No, you don't. We will. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm not approving of this. I'm just saying that's Trump's thing. And so when he sees Erdogan pull a Trump in Syria, he's like, yeah, Yeah, I got that. I respect that. Um, and, I think he put, because here's the other reality. Israel can't do anything without the United States.
Yes.
Israel can't commit genocide in Gaza without the United. That's a horrible thing to say because Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, which means America is to blame. And this is a statement of fact. We are facilitating genocide. I'm not proud of it. It disgusts me. But Israel can't do it without our help. They use our weapons, and we provide the economic backing and the diplomatic backing that enables Israel to survive uh, as the rest of the world rightfully turns its back on Israel. Israel can't bomb Lebanon without America.
Yeah.
Can't do it. Um, Israel couldn't go into Syria without America. Israel definitely can't attack Iran without America.
Yeah.
And Israel can't go to war against Turkey without America. And what Trump did in this statement is put a marker on the table to Netanyahu saying, back off. Turkey's got Syria. You need to back off. And, so now Turkey's probably going to deploy S-400 missiles into Syrian airspace. And the day of the Israeli Air Force flying over Syria, bombing anything he just wants to is probably over. That's a setback for Netanyahu. He didn't get what he wanted there. And I would even say the strategy of Gaza. I don't want to go into it because I just despise it. But I still think it's unrealistic. I still think that Donald Trump is, and the reason why I say this, people are like, Scott, you're just buying into the Trump thing. Remember when he first came out with this stupid statement?
Yeah.
When Netanyahu was there, remember the white knuckling that Netanyahu was doing because he was like, "What is he saying? I've never heard this before."
They were standing on the podiums. Yes, they were not.
I said at the time,
like the other day.
I said, this is a fake policy. That this is merely Donald Trump huffing and puffing because he's looking for a counter proposal. Because Donald Trump is breaking with the failed past negotiated methodologies that haven't helped anybody. He put something extreme out there. And, then Jordan and Egypt came together and said, we're willing to come in and reconstruct and do this. And Marco Rubio said, we now have a counter proposal.
Yes.
Marco Rubio said that. And I was like, because I'm the one who said, I think they're looking for a counter proposal. And Rubio said, we now have a counter proposal. So I'm like, that's it. I was right. Now he's doing this again. Is he looking for a better counter proposal? Because to tell you the truth, I don't know how you put 100,000 American troops into Gaza. I just don't know how that's going to happen. I don't know how I don't believe the American people would stand by while we forcefully depopulate Gaza and commit huge war crimes. So I'm hopeful that this is just Donald Trump huffing and puffing and getting big orange face, and he's going to, do this to get a counter proposal. That's what I'm hoping, is that he's looking for a counter proposal. This isn't real policy. We'll see. Now, there was the third thing. You mentioned Turkey, and then you mentioned one other aspect that he brought up in front of Netanyahu.
It's about him catching him off guard, Netanyahu off guard, when he mentioned that we're getting into talks with Iran, and about Turkey. Hold back when it comes to
Iran.
No, you covered it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Iran. I'll just say this: Israel has been trying to get the United States to bomb Iran forever.
Oh yes.
This didn't invent with Donald Trump. They tried to get the Biden administration to do it. They tried to get Trump to do it the first time around. They tried to get Obama to do it. They tried to get George W. Bush to do it. They tried to get Bill Clinton to do it. And it's just not in America's interests.
No, it's not.
It's not in our interests at all to go to war with Iran. There's so many downsides, so many negatives to this. But we are in a situation right now where this matter has come to a head. And Donald Trump is not your normal president. And this presidency is not the same presidency we saw the first time around. And I think he's more prone to put all the chips on the table to get the other side to bluff. And I see that's what's happening here. I know that Donald Trump knows that going to war with Iran is one of the dumbest moves ever. Because first of all, he knows that the only way he can do it is with nuclear weapons. Why? Because he designed the war plan the last time around when he was briefed that their Iranian nuclear infrastructure is underground. We can't get it with our conventional weapons. Donald Trump gave the order to develop the low-yield ground-penetrating nuclear weapons that could be used. And then he redid the war plan so that we would use them. So he knows what the consequences will be. This isn't going to take him by surprise. He also knows, because he was planning on bombing Iran once before when they shot down an RQ-4 Global Hawk, that the consequences of initiating military action on Iranian soil could be devastating to the global economy, because Iran will shut down oil production in the region. And he knows that Iran has the ability to do damage to American military installations that we can't defend against, because he was the president when Iran fired ballistic missiles in the Al-Assad air base in Iraq. He knows all of this. So the people out there are saying, well, Donald Trump's a warmongering, this, that, and the other thing. I don't think Donald Trump wants a war with Iran. This is why Steve Witkoff's going out to negotiate. And I think Steve Witkoff's been given tremendous latitude to get to a negotiated agreement, because Donald Trump doesn't want a war. He doesn't want a war because he knows what the consequences of a war will be. And Netanyahu, I think, misreads Trump. He misreads the fact that Trump has been, for deploying B-2 bombers and all this stuff. And he's like, yeah, Trump's finally going to do what we wanted everybody else to do. And as you said, he was sitting there and his face was like, I don't know why he's talking about negotiations. He should be talking about bombing. I'm confused. Because Donald Trump doesn't work for Benjamin Netanyahu. And for all the people out there that demean my country and demean my president by suggesting that we do work for Israel, you're wrong. That doesn't mean we're right. It doesn't mean what we're doing is good. But it does mean that we are a sovereign state and we are in charge of our own affairs.
Scott Ritter, thank you. Thank you very much for joining us today to help provide clarity to all this insanity, really. Well, clarity to the developments, I should have more correctly said. You know that your personal analysis is always on very much appreciated here on the channel. And I want to thank you once again.
Well, thank you very much for having me. And, this issue isn't going away, so hopefully we can talk again in the future.
Yes, hopefully.